This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. Our top stories. North Korea suspends talks with the South, telling it to cancel military exercises with the United States. Funerals in Gaza for the almost 60 Palestinians killed by Israeli forces.
Politicians and diplomats abroad call for peace, but real peace talks failed a long time ago.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London, also in this programme. Myanmar's other refugee crisis, the Kachin Christian minority forced to flee by the military's advances. And concern over Meghan Markle's father ahead of Saturday's royal wedding. He is reported to be facing heart surgery.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Glad you could join us. It's 8 in the morning here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London, and 8 in the morning in Pyongyang, where North Korea has cancelled planned talks with South Korea in protest against joint military exercises being held by the South and the United States. Well, the state news agency even went so far as casting doubt over the planned summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump in Singapore into question. Well, the U.S. State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert had this to say a little earlier.
Kim Jong-un had said previously that he understands the need and the utility of the United States and the Republic of Korea continuing in its joint exercises. They're exercises that are legal, they're planned well in advance. We have not heard anything from that government or the government of South Korea to indicate that we would not continue conducting these exercises or that we would not continue planning for our meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un next month.
Earlier, I spoke to the BBC's Barbara Plett-Usher in Washington. I asked her how the White House reacted to this development.
Very terse statement, really. Actually, not quite as optimistic as Heather Nauert. There may be a bit more cautious, just saying we are aware of the South Korean media report. The U.S. will look at North Korea, has said independently, and continue to coordinate closely with our allies. So it seems it was a statement they were not expecting and are not really welcoming it, as you can imagine. But as Heather was saying, as the State Department spokeswoman was saying, they have not stopped planning for the summit. They are continuing to do that until and unless they get a clear indication from either North Korea or South Korea that they should discontinue doing that.
And some analysts are saying that this latest move by Kim could be aimed at testing President Trump's willingness to make concessions ahead of the Singapore summit on the 12th of June.
Well, I suppose it could be. It is a return to rhetoric of the past at an unexpected time. I think it was not unlikely that there would be some hiccups along the way to the summit, perhaps not this late in the game. And I think as threats go, it was reasonably mild. It was something about the U.S. needed to carefully consider its operations, which is more like saying, you know, it would be a shame for the summit not to go ahead rather than it will not go ahead. I think Kim Jong-un has made it pretty clear that he wants that photo opportunity with President Trump. But you may be right. He may be using this as a way to sort of send a warning, to test to see just how far President Trump and indeed the President of South Korea are willing to go to appease him or to engage with him. And I think you might also be looking at him saying that he does have some power here. You know, President Trump has, and his officials have been saying that Kim Jong-un has come to the table because of the sanctions regime, that they have sort of squeezed him to the point where he's been forced to come to the table. The North Koreans have been saying, no, this is our choice. We have finished our nuclear weapons program. This is something we want to do. So it may be that he's making the point that the North Koreans do have this in their hands as well.
Barbara Plett-Usher there on whether or not those meetings, those summits will take place. Now on to some of the day's other news stories. And funerals have been held for some of the more than 50 people who were killed when Israeli troops fired on Palestinian protesters in Gaza on Monday. It was the fiercest clashes since 2014, and officials say that more than 2,000 people were also injured. There have been further smaller protests on Tuesday. Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bone reports now from Gaza.
On the border, the soundtrack was anti-Israeli songs, not gunfire. 24 hours after the killing, the big protests have stopped. But tires were burning, and Palestinians looked warily towards the Israeli positions. Enterprising traders brought refreshments. So what's next? The Israelis deal with the international political fallout. The Palestinians have 60 dead. Politicians and diplomats abroad call for peace, but real peace talks failed a long time ago. And with the current generation of the Palestinian and Israeli leaders, there is no chance of them being revived. The Israelis started firing tear gas. The crowd, by then including many families, was getting too big. And the young men were getting too close to the border wire. On the other side, the Israelis say they're in the right.
We are not here looking to create casualties of Palestinians. That is not our aim. We are simply here to defend what is ours. We are defending our sovereignty, our civilians that live in close proximity, against an onslaught led by a terrorist organization that is using civilians in order to penetrate into Israel.
Much of Gaza's rage is born in places like Beach Camp, still a home for refugees 70 years after more than 700,000 Palestinians fled or were forced out of their homes by newly independent Israel. Palestinians call it Nakba, catastrophe. 70% of Palestinians in Gaza are refugees, stuck fast in history. At the Al Farouk Mosque, Yazan Tobasi's funeral was much quieter than his death, shot through the eye during the protests. His body was wrapped in the Hamas flag. He was 23 and his friends were there to bury him. There were tender moments. Israel says it told them to stay away from the border and Hamas is responsible for what happened. His friend Mohammed al-Barawi said Yazan had worked at the hospital without pay because of Gaza's collapsing economy. Poverty and grief breed anger. And so do the deaths of children. A family gathered for another funeral. It was for Layla Al-Khandour, who was 8 months old. She had a weak heart, and when she inhaled tear gas, she died, her family said. Children make up half Gaza's population. 6 were killed on Monday, according to the Ministry of Health. Her mother, Mariam, was in a pit of grief. At Shifa, the main hospital, wounded men were being transferred to Egypt for surgery. Inside, they were still treating casualties from the protest. This boy is 16. All day I've been asking Palestinians if Hamas forced them to risk their lives at the protests. No one said yes. I did it because Jerusalem is Palestinian, said Wadir Aras, unemployed, 24 years old. This is the busiest time at the hospital since the 2014 war.
As a human being, I speak, it's horrible to think about. If you see yesterday the situation, it's horrible. Crying, bloody, painful. What's happening?
After the protests, it seems that many people are hoping for some kind of turning point. But the fundamentals of this conflict don't change. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Gaza.
And we do have much more analysis on our website. But now, also making the news today, the European Union's foreign policy chief says that the EU cannot provide any legal or economic guarantees to Iran about delivering the benefits of the nuclear deal now that the US has withdrawn. Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has been meeting European Union countries about the future of this deal. The EU says it's still considering options to save the agreement.
There are very clear economic benefits that have been specified in the JCPOA that Iranian people have to receive in order for the balance that was created in the JCPOA and carefully negotiated negotiated in the JCPOA to remain.
Facebook has revealed it's removed more than 580 million fake accounts. It's also published data for the first time about the amount of inappropriate content it removes, showing a sharp increase in the number of posts containing graphic violence. It follows calls for transparency after the privacy scandal involving the British firm Cambridge Analytica. Enrico will have much more on this in Asia Business Report straight after this edition of Newsday. The Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been sentenced to 30 days in prison for organising protests ahead of President Putin's inauguration for a fourth office earlier this month. Mr. Navalny was among at least 300 people who were arrested at an unauthorised rally held in central Moscow on the 5th of May. And Russia's president said that he is confident that people will love the new bridge which links Russia and the Crimean Peninsula. And Vladimir Putin himself inaugurated this highly controversial bridge by, as you can see, driving a truck across it. It is what is being called Europe's longest bridge. Now, of course, Crimea was annexed by Moscow from Ukraine in 2014. Ukraine says that Russia is continuing to act outside of international law.
The Burmese military has intensified its assault on Christian rebels fighting for independence in Myanmar's Kachin state. Some 4,000 people have fled their homes since early April, according to the United Nations, and there are fears that many people remain trapped in conflict-stricken areas near the border with China. Our Myanmar correspondent Nick Beek has more from Yangon.
Desperate and with nowhere to go. These are the Christians of the northernmost part of Myanmar, forced from their homes by recent fighting. Elephants offer the only way of escape, carrying men, women and children across the water and whatever possessions they could gather. The conflict here in Kachin state has dragged on for more than half a century, but has been overshadowed recently by the scale of the persecution of Rohingya Muslims in the west of the country. But the Burmese military has now intensified its assault on the Christian rebels fighting for independence in Kachin. The army is accused of bombing this school, although it insists it doesn't target civilians. No pupils were in lessons at the time of this reported attack.
A bomb exploded 40 to 50 feet away from the Baptist Mission School's kitchen. It was inside the compound in Bam Wang village.
Many in Myanmar are fed up with the ongoing conflict in the country's border regions, and at the weekend they showed it. In the main city Yangon, the police arrested demonstrators. 17 now face charges, a move condemned by human rights groups. The Burmese leader Aung San Suu Kyi says her priority is bringing peace. It seems a long way off. Nick Beek, BBC News, Yangon.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from Singapore and London. Still to come on the program. Media reports that Meghan Markle's father needs heart surgery cast more doubts over his attendance at the royal wedding.
Also coming up on the program, Malaysia prepares for a pardon. The jailed opposition icon Anwar Ibrahim is just hours away from his royal reprieve.
Glad you're staying with us. This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top stories. North Korea has suspended talks with South Korea, blaming its military exercises with the United States.
A minute's silence has been held at a meeting of the United Nations Security Council in memory of the almost 60 Palestinians killed by Israeli forces during violence over the past 2 days.
And that's one of the stories that's making the international front pages of the newspapers. Now let's start off with the international edition of the New York Times, which has a story about the former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal, who was nearly poisoned to death in March right here in the UK. Now the paper says that he met with foreign intelligence operatives and also spies offering briefings on Russia. But the paper says that it's not actually certain whether his travels made him a target or if in fact the Russian government knew about them. And yes, next, the Gulf News features our main story, the violence in Gaza, in which dozens of Palestinian demonstrators were killed by the Israeli army in those protests against the opening of the US embassy in Jerusalem. The paper shows the picture of the grieving mother, the picture that we also showed in Jeremy Bowen's story. She is, of course, mourning the death of her 8-month-old infant, who passed away after inhaling tear gas. And the international edition of the China Daily has a heartwarming story about an autism coffee shop. It's the Shanghai non-profit cafe which trained autistic teenagers to help them interact with other people. Well, we can say that it has received 500 offers of help from different venues after the cafe was closed down earlier this month because of rent issues. So you're up to date with the papers.
Malaysia's former Deputy Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is expected to be released from prison over the next few hours. Anwar was jailed on sodomy charges in 2015, but the election of Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad last week has paved the way for him to be given a full royal pardon. Wong Chin Wat is a political expert and fellow at the Malaysian think tank Penang Institute, and he joins me now from Kuala Lumpur. Mr. Wong, thank you so much for joining us. When Anwar is pardoned and released, what would be the first step for him to get back into the political landscape?
He would need to run in a by-election to be elected to return to Parliament and then to be appointed as a cabinet minister. I believe he would take over as Deputy Prime Minister as well.
Would he really want to be Deputy Prime Minister, which is currently occupied by his wife, Wan Aziza, or just a political advisor and a cabinet member of the Mahathir administration?
I think the better solution would be for him to replace his wife as Deputy Prime Minister. As a matter of fact, the by-election may need to take place with his wife vacates her seat.
All right, if he becomes Deputy Prime Minister, the big question is, of course, the Prime Minister has said he can take power in 1 to 2 years. In your view, Mr. Wong, could it be sooner than that?
I think it is in everyone's interest for the transition between from Mahathir to Anwar to be smooth. So very likely they would strike a deal to share power for the next 2 years. It would be exactly 2020, the year that Mahathir envisioned Malaysia to be a developed country. So it would be a closure for Mahathir. And in this 2 years period, I think Anwar will be given a lot of power to prepare for his own prime ministership.
But anything can happen between now and over the next 2 years. So there's still a possibility that Anwar will never become prime minister.
It is possible. What would keep the deals working is their mutual need for each other, because none of the 4 parties in the Pakatan Harapan coalition is large enough to ignore others. So they need each other. I think this mutual need is the best guarantee for power sharing.
All right. If he becomes prime minister, are we going to see more younger leaders move up the chain and eventually succeed Mahathir and Anwar?
Yes, I think so. This is already happening as many young and talented leaders are already in the front line.
Thank you so much for your insights on Malaysian politics. Wong Chin Wat from the Malaysian think tank Penang Institute.
Meghan Markle's father is reported to have said that he will not attend his daughter's wedding to Prince Harry on Saturday because he needs to undergo a heart procedure. There have been concerns over his health since allegations surfaced that he'd staged press photos of himself preparing for the wedding. Well, from Buckingham Palace, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has this update.
Picture really is absolutely unclear tonight. A few hours ago, the celebrity gossip website TMZ, which was the first last night to report that Thomas Markle would not be attending the wedding, well, tonight it was reporting that he had changed his mind and that he wanted to come to the wedding after hearing from his daughter. But there is one major problem, and that is that it is reported that he's in hospital, that he's experienced chest pains. It's been reported that he suffered a heart attack some 6 days ago. It's reported that he's undergoing medical tests, and it is suggested that he may be having surgery tomorrow. Now, if that is correct and it's not been confirmed, I think it would rule out him being at St. George's Chapel on Saturday. I think Meghan Markle, much as she has wanted her father to be there, to walk her down the aisle, I think her major concern now is for her father's health and well-being. But tonight, to the question, will the father of the bride get to the church on time, there is still no definitive answer.
Nicholas Witchell there reporting. At weddings, it's usually the bride and groom getting gifts, but one Indian charity and the women it helps will be benefiting from the royal wedding. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have asked guests for donations for 7 charities, and one of them is based in India. The BBC's Yogita Lamay picks up the story in Mumbai.
Women on a mission. They're selling sanitary towels in a Mumbai slum.
XL, double XL.
They make low-cost pads and try to persuade more women to use them. This work caught the attention of Meghan Markle, and now she and Prince Harry have asked wedding guests to donate to the organization. Menstruation is still a taboo topic in India.
Many people bang the door in our faces. If there are men around, the women don't talk to us. But since the royal wedding news, more people recognize us. They tell us they've seen us on TV. They recognize our brand.
Mumbai is one of India's biggest cities, but even here, several women don't have access to sanitary pads because of social and economic reasons. Now, this is something Meghan Markle has seen firsthand when she visited slums like these last year and interacted with residents here.
Miss Markle also saw how the pads were made. She then wrote about her visit and the stigma surrounding periods in India in Time magazine. Suhani Jalota, the founder of the charity, says she wasn't expecting to be on the list of organizations chosen by the royal couple.
We were definitely very surprised, but we were happy that she really kept her, her word, that she would support us in any way that she could. We can now go to many more communities, speak to many more women, and we feel confident about what we're saying because it's kind of as a validation that, what you're doing is important, what you're doing is probably taking it in the right direction as well.
Suhani hopes the donations will help employ more women and reach more communities. A few of the women from the foundation have also been invited to the wedding. They plan to wear traditional saris.
We never travel in a plane. This is the first time we are going to travel in the plane. And both are really very excited and very happy. I can't explain anything.
Just for a few days, they'll be flying far away from the many challenges they and so many other Indian women face. Yogita Lamay, BBC, Mumbai.
So that is one of 7 charities to which Meghan Markle and Prince Harry have asked their wedding guests to donate to rather than bring gifts for the big day itself. The big day, which is, of course, this Saturday. And we are still facing uncertainty over whether Meghan Markle's father will attend the wedding. A US entertainment magazine is now reporting that Thomas Markle is to undergo urgent heart surgery and that he will not be able to attend the ceremony, but the Prince Harry's office, Kensington Palace, declining to comment. But as always, we will monitor any twists and turns. The BBC is the place to keep up to date with all of the preparations for the royal wedding. Special coverage of the event starts on Thursday, the 17th of May, and we will be live in Windsor, and we really hope that you can join us for that.
And you've been watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. Stay with us. We'll be taking a look at the social network giant Facebook as it closes more than 580 million accounts. We find out how the company deals with graphic and violent content.
And we've been talking about wedding gifts. This rare blue diamond was one such thing. It has now sold at auction in Geneva for $6.7 million. This was a wedding present to Elizabeth Farnese, the daughter of the Duke of Parma, when she married King Philippe V of Spain in 1715. It has spent the last 300 years in various European royal houses.
It is a 6.1 carat diamond mined in India, and it was sold at auction in just 4 minutes. So, yeah, an extraordinary achievement for an extraordinary rock.